Rosewood Family Restaurant was packed every Sunday morning, the kind of place where families waited 45 minutes for pancakes and considered it worth it. The kind of place where the waiting area was always crowded, always noisy, always uncomfortable. Victoria Lane stood near the host stand, checking her phone for the third time in 2 minutes. 41 years old, CEO of a $4 billion tech company specializing in accessibility solutions, wearing white slacks and a cream blazer even on a Sunday. Hair perfect, posture perfect, everything controlled. She'd been waiting 20 minutes, had secured one of the few bench seats in the waiting area early, claiming it before the Sunday rush hit full force. Now she sat comfortably while others stood around her, a sea of families and couples packed into the small space. The restaurant host had just called another name. A family moved toward the dining room. The crowd shifted, closing the gap they left behind. And in that shifting crowd, barely visible among the adults and noise and movement, stood a small girl. Harper was 7 years old. She had light brown hair pulled into a practical ponytail and wore a purple jacket. In each hand she gripped small crutches, the kind designed for children with colorful grips and adjustable heights. Her legs were thin, unsteady. She'd been standing for 20 minutes, maybe longer. Her mother stood beside her, one hand resting protectively on Harper's shoulder. An older boy, maybe 9, stood on Harper's other side playing a game on a phone, oblivious. Harper shifted her weight carefully, winced slightly. The crutches helped her walk, but standing still for long periods was harder. Her arms were getting tired. Her legs ached. She looked around the waiting area. Every bench was full. Adults sat comfortably, scrolling phones, chatting, checking the time. Nobody looked at her. Nobody saw. Victoria's eyes passed over the crowd, over Harper, over the small girl struggling to stay upright while adults sat comfortable around her. Victoria looked back at her phone, scrolled through emails, responded to one. She'd seen Harper. For just a second, her eyes had registered the girl with crutches standing in the crowd, and she'd chosen to look away. Across the waiting area, sitting on another bench near the window, James Pierce watched, 37 years old, wearing jeans and a faded yellow work jacket. Carpenter's hands, calloused and strong. Beside him sat his 6-year-old son, Ethan, in a bright red hoodie, swinging his legs and humming softly. James had been watching Harper for 5 minutes, watching her shift her weight, watching her wince, watching the crowd flow around her like she was invisible, and watching the woman on the bench, the one in the expensive clothes with the perfect posture, look directly at Harper and then deliberately back at her phone. James knew that look, knew what it meant to see something uncomfortable and choose to look away. He'd done it himself once, 3 years ago, in the months after his wife died, when grief had made him blind to everything except his own pain. It had taken a stranger's kindness to wake him up, a grocery store clerk who'd noticed Ethan crying in the cart and had stopped to ask if the boy was okay. James had been too numb to notice his own son's tears. He wouldn't be that person again. James looked at Harper, at this small girl the world was ignoring, at the way her mother's hand rested on her shoulder, protective but helpless, because what could she do? Demand someone give up a seat? Make a scene? Most people, James had learned, would rather suffer in silence than cause discomfort to others. He made a decision. Subscribe to Becca's Stories for powerful narratives of transformation and human resilience. James leaned close to Ethan. "Hey, buddy, scoot closer to me, okay? Real tight." Ethan looked up, confused but trusting. "Why, Daddy?" "Because somebody needs sitting more than we need space," James said quietly. Ethan nodded seriously. He understood. His father had taught him this, that sometimes comfort was something you shared, not something you hoarded. James shifted to his right, moving closer to the end of the bench. Ethan scooted with him. They pressed together, shoulder to shoulder, compressed into a space meant for 1.5 people, maybe. It was uncomfortable. James' shoulder hit the wooden armrest. Ethan was squeezed against his side. But now there was space. 1 seat, just enough. James caught Harper's mother's eye, gestured to the open seat with a small nod. Silent, no announcement, no drawing attention. Harper's mother blinked, looked at the space, looked at James and Ethan, now squeezed together uncomfortably. Her eyes filled with tears. "Harper," she whispered, touching her daughter's shoulder. "Sweetheart, that man made space for you. You can sit." Harper looked up, saw the open seat, saw James and Ethan compressed together, making themselves smaller so she could have room. "Are you sure?" Harper asked softly, her voice barely audible over the restaurant noise. James smiled gently. "Very sure. Go ahead." Harper moved carefully, slowly, using her crutches to navigate the 2 steps to the bench. She sat down with visible relief, leaning her crutches against the wall beside her. Her face relaxed. The pain in her legs eased slightly. "Thank you," Harper's mother whispered, her voice thick. Nobody ever... Thank you." "No problem," James said simply. He meant it. Ethan, squeezed against his father's side, looked at Harper and smiled. "Hi, I'm Ethan. That's my daddy. We're squished now, but it's okay. Squishing's not so bad." Harper smiled, a small, genuine smile. "I'm Harper. Thank you for squishing." "You're welcome," Ethan said seriously. "Daddy says sometimes people need sitting and sometimes people need squishing, and you gotta know which one you are." Across the waiting area, Victoria had looked up at the movement. She'd seen the shift, seen the man and boy compress themselves into an uncomfortable space, seen the girl with crutches sit down, relief visible on her small face. Something tightened in Victoria's chest. She stared, couldn't help it, couldn't look away. The man hadn't made a show of it, hadn't called attention to himself, hadn't demanded recognition. He'd just moved, made room, sacrificed his comfort so a child could sit. Victoria looked down at her own bench seat. She was sitting comfortably, had plenty of space, could have done exactly what that man did, could have made room for Harper. But she hadn't. She'd looked at the girl with crutches and chosen to do nothing, chosen to pretend she hadn't seen, chosen her own comfort over a child's pain. Victoria felt something she hadn't felt in years. Shame. 10 minutes passed. The restaurant called another name. The crowd shifted again. Victoria couldn't focus on her phone anymore. She kept glancing at the compressed family on the opposite bench, at the man sitting uncomfortably, shoulder jammed against the armrest, at the little boy squeezed against his father's side, uncomplaining, at the girl with crutches, finally sitting, finally resting, and at the girl's mother, who kept wiping her eyes discreetly, overwhelmed by a simple act of kindness that should have been normal, but clearly wasn't. How many times had this happened, Victoria wondered. How many times had Harper stood while others sat? How many times had her mother watched, helpless, as the world chose to ignore her daughter's struggle? Harper was talking to Ethan now. Quiet conversation. The boy was showing her something on his father's phone. Animal videos, it looked like. Harper was smiling, genuinely happy. "That's a red panda," Ethan explained seriously. "They're endangered. That means there's not many left. Daddy says we have to take care of things that need help." "They're cute," Harper said softly. "Yeah. Daddy, can we show Harper the one with the baby elephants?" "Sure, bud," James said, scrolling to find the video. His arm was cramping from the awkward position, but his voice was patient, kind. Victoria watched, and with every passing minute, the shame in her chest grew heavier. She was the CEO of an accessibility company. Her business, her billion-dollar empire, was built on the idea of making spaces inclusive, making technology available to everyone, removing barriers. And she'd sat in a crowded restaurant and ignored a disabled child who needed a seat. The hypocrisy was staggering. Victoria's phone buzzed. a message from her VP of Product Development, a question about their new accessibility audit software, the software they were selling to businesses to help them identify and fix accessibility gaps. She stared at the message, started to type a response, stopped, deleted it. She couldn't do this right now, couldn't pretend to be an expert on accessibility while sitting comfortably, having ignored a child who needed help. The host called another name. The crowd shifted again. Victoria looked up, watched the movement, watched James adjust slightly, maintaining his compressed position even as space opened elsewhere. He could have moved, could have reclaimed his comfort. He didn't. He stayed squeezed beside his son, keeping that space available for Harper. Victoria's chest tightened further. "Does it hurt?" Ethan asked, pointing to Harper's crutches with the innocent directness of a 6-year-old. "Ethan," James said gently, "that's personal." "It's okay," Harper said quietly. "Sometimes it hurts. My legs don't work like other people's, so I use these to help me walk, and standing for a long time makes them tired, really tired." "That's why you needed sitting," Ethan said, nodding like it all made sense now. "Yeah," Harper agreed. "Nobody else made room," Ethan observed, "just us. Why didn't other people move?" Harper's mother closed her eyes briefly. The question hit hard. Harper shrugged. "People don't notice, or they pretend not to. It's okay. I'm used to it." "You shouldn't have to be used to it," James said quietly. Not angry, just sad. Honest. Harper looked at him. "But I am." Those 3 words hung in the air. Heavy. True. Devastating. Victoria heard them, felt them land like stones in her chest. You shouldn't have to be used to it. But Harper was, because people like Victoria made her used to it. People who saw and chose not to see. People who could help and chose comfort instead. Victoria's hands gripped her phone tighter. She wanted to stand, wanted to do something. But what? Apologize to a child she'd never spoken to? Confess to strangers that she'd failed a basic test of human decency? She stayed seated, frozen, watching, feeling the shame grow heavier with every passing second.
Harper's mother's phone rang. She answered quietly, speaking in hushed tones. A moment later, she touched Harper's shoulder. "Sweetie, Grandma can't make it. She's not feeling well. It's just going to be us 3. Harper nodded, unbothered. She was used to plans changing. The mother looked at the crowd, calculating. They'd probably have to wait another 20 minutes, maybe more. She glanced at Harper's crutches leaning against the wall. Her daughter was resting now, but eventually they'd be called, and the long walk to their table, the standing while ordering, it would all be hard again. James noticed. "You okay?" he asked gently. Harper's mother nodded, smiled weakly. "Yes, thank you, again, for this, for making space. You have no idea how much it means." "I think I do," James said quietly. Victoria watched this exchange, watched the gratitude, the exhaustion, the resignation to a world that didn't make room, and she couldn't sit anymore. She stood abruptly, walked toward the restroom, locked herself in a stall, leaned against the wall. Her hands were shaking. She was 41 years old, successful, powerful, rich. She'd built an empire on the idea of accessibility, on inclusion, on making space for people the world overlooked. And she'd sat on a comfortable bench and ignored a 7-year-old who needed help. What did that make her? When Victoria returned to the waiting area, she moved differently, slower, more aware. She saw the young mother with the toddler standing near the wall, bouncing the fussy child. Saw an elderly man leaning against the host stand, clearly tired. Saw 3 teenagers standing in a cluster, laughing, unbothered by the wait. And she saw her own empty bench seat, still there, still comfortable, still available. Victoria walked to it, stood beside it, looked at the young mother. "Please," Victoria said quietly, "sit. You look tired." The mother blinked, surprised. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Victoria said. "I've been sitting long enough." The mother sat gratefully, settling the toddler in her lap. "Thank you. That's really kind." Victoria nodded. It wasn't kind. It was late. It was overdue. It was what she should have done 30 minutes ago. She stood in the waiting area, uncomfortable, aware, watching. James and Ethan were still compressed on their bench. Harper was still sitting, now drawing something on a napkin her brother had given her. 5 minutes later, the host called, "Pierce, party of 2." James stood carefully, extracting himself from the tight space. Ethan hopped down, stretching dramatically. "Finally," Ethan said. "I was getting really squished." "I know, buddy. Thank you for being patient." James turned to Harper. "You take care, okay?" Harper looked up at him, and in her eyes was something that broke Victoria from across the room. Gratitude. Deep, overwhelming gratitude for something as simple as a seat, for being seen, for mattering to someone, even a stranger, even for 20 minutes. "Thank you," Harper said, "for making room. Nobody ever makes room." James knelt down, eye level with her. "They should. You deserve room just as much as anyone. Don't let anyone make you think different." Harper nodded. Her eyes were wet. James stood, took Ethan's hand, started to walk toward the dining room. And Victoria couldn't stand it anymore. Couldn't watch this stranger do what she should have done. Couldn't let him leave without what? Thanking him? Confessing her shame? Making excuses? She didn't know. She just moved. "Excuse me," Victoria said, her voice shakier than intended. "What you did for that girl, making room. I should have done that. I saw her and I looked away." James met her eyes. He'd seen her too, seen her sitting while Harper stood. "So do it next time," he said simply. "You can't fix what already happened, but you can do better going forward." The host called his name again. "I have to go. But hey, you saw what you did wrong. What you do next is what matters." He walked away. Ethan waved over his shoulder. Victoria stood alone. Then she looked at Harper, still sitting, still tired, still mostly invisible to everyone except the one person who had already left. She couldn't fix this moment, but she could remember it.
A hostess approached Victoria. "Ma'am, you can't stand in the walkway. You need to be seated or wait outside." "I gave my seat to someone who needed it more," Victoria said quietly. The hostess looked uncomfortable. "That's nice, but fire code—" "I understand," Victoria interrupted, not wanting to argue, not wanting to make this about her. "I'll wait outside." She walked out, stood in the morning sun, waited another 15 minutes before her name was called. She ate breakfast alone, thought about James's words, "You can't fix what already happened, but you can do better going forward." Could she? Monday morning, Victoria walked into her office and called a meeting. "I want a real accessibility audit of this building," she said, "done by people who actually live with accessibility challenges, not consultants, real people." Over the next months, Victoria learned. She learned that her beautiful office was full of barriers she'd never noticed. She learned that the most valuable voices were the ones she'd been ignoring. She hired parent advocates. She listened more than she spoke. She made changes, not perfect ones, but real ones. And she learned that the hardest thing wasn't changing buildings. It was changing herself, learning to see, learning to stop, learning to make room. 6 months later, Victoria returned to Rosewood Family Restaurant. The waiting area had changed, 12 benches now instead of 6. Signs on the wall. "Please offer seating to those who need it. We're all waiting together." It wasn't perfect, but it was better. Harper was there with her mother, waiting for a table. Victoria sat down beside them. Harper looked up, smiled in recognition. "Hi," Harper said. "You're the lady from before." "I am," Victoria said. "How are you, Harper?" "Good. There's more benches now. I don't have to stand." "That's really good," Victoria said. The host called a name, not theirs. They kept waiting together. And then Victoria saw him, James, with Ethan, walking into the waiting area. He saw her. Recognition, surprise, then a slow smile. "Hey," James said, walking over. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same," Victoria replied. "We come every month," Ethan announced proudly. "It's our tradition. Right, Addie?" "Right," James agreed. He looked around the waiting area, saw the new benches, saw the signs. His smile widened. "This is different. Better." "It is," Victoria said, "thanks to some people who knew how to make room." James met her eyes. Understanding passed between them. He nodded. They sat together, waited together. When Harper's name was called, her mother waved goodbye. Harper smiled at Victoria before leaving. James looked at Victoria. "You doing okay?" "Learning to make room," Victoria said. "Still figuring it out." "That's all any of us can do," James said simply. "Pierce, party of two." James stood. Before leaving, he said quietly, "Keep at it." Victoria nodded. "See you around." "See you," James replied. She sat alone on the bench, but not isolated anymore, not invisible, just waiting, like everyone else. And when a young father walked in, carrying a tired toddler, when the waiting area started to fill up and the father looked around for somewhere to sit his exhausted child, Victoria didn't hesitate. She shifted over, made herself smaller, created space. "Here," she said quietly, "you can sit." The father looked grateful. "Thank you. She's been on her feet all morning." "I understand," Victoria said. And she did. She sat compressed, uncomfortable, shoulder against the armrest. It wasn't pleasant, but it was right. And across the waiting area, James caught her eye, nodded once. Approval. Recognition. She'd learned. She was still learning. And every time she made room, every time she chose discomfort over looking away, she remembered. A disabled girl standing in a crowd, a single dad who shifted one seat, and the moment she realized that sometimes the smallest actions, the quietest gestures, were the ones that changed everything.
Sometimes we see people who need help and choose to look away. And sometimes all it takes to change everything is making yourself a little smaller so someone else can finally sit down. If this story reminded you that discomfort is a choice worth making, type in the comments, "I'll make room," and subscribe to Becca's Stories. Copyright and content notice. This work is fully original. AI tools support our process but are not used to copy or plagiarize copyrighted material. All stories are fictional and not intended to represent real people, groups, or events. Any resemblance is coincidental.